The man grabbed my arm so suddenly that I almost fell off the trail. His fingers dug into my jacket as he pulled me closer and whispered something that immediately turned my blood cold. "Whatever you do, don't look behind you." The way he said it wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, controlled, like someone who had already accepted something terrible. And the worst part was that he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, into the woods behind my back. My first instinct was to spin around immediately. Anyone would have done the same thing. But something in his eyes stopped me. Pure fear. The kind of fear you only see in people who know something you don't. "What's behind me?" I asked. His breathing was uneven, like he had been running for a long time. "She's been following you," he said. The forest around us was completely silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. This happened almost 9 years ago, and I still think about it every time I go camping. Back then I was 52 and had just recently retired from a long career as a mechanic in Colorado. My wife had passed away a few years earlier, and I had gotten into the habit of taking long solo hiking trips into the mountains whenever I needed to clear my head. That particular weekend I had chosen a trail in western Wyoming that most tourists avoided. It wasn't part of any national park and didn't have marked campsites or ranger stations. Just an old service road that eventually disappeared into the mountains. Exactly the kind of place where you could spend 2 days without seeing another human being. I parked my truck near the trailhead around midday and started hiking in with my pack. The weather was perfect. Clear sky, cool air, and the smell of pine trees everywhere. The trail followed a narrow valley between 2 forested ridges. After about 3 miles, I found a small clearing beside a creek and decided it was the perfect place to camp for the night. I set up my tent, collected some firewood, and spent the afternoon fishing in the creek. Nothing unusual happened for hours, but around sunset I started to notice something strange. The forest felt empty. Not quiet, empty. Anyone who spends enough time outdoors knows the difference. Usually there are birds, insects, small animals moving through the trees. That evening there was nothing, just wind moving through the branches. I tried not to think too much about it. After dinner, I built a small fire and sat in my folding chair watching the stars come out. It must have been around 9 p.m. when I heard the first sound. Footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the woods behind my campsite. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. "Hello," I called out. The footsteps stopped instantly. I waited. 30 seconds passed. Then the footsteps started again. But this time they were moving away. Slow, deliberate, like someone who didn't want to be noticed. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. Still, I told myself it was probably another hiker who didn't want to interrupt someone's campsite. The rest of the night passed without anything else happening. Around midnight, I climbed into my tent and fell asleep. I woke up to screaming. At first I thought it was an animal, but then I realized it was a man. The screaming was coming from somewhere down the trail. Branches snapping. Heavy footsteps. Someone running through the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside the tent. The screaming got louder. Then suddenly a man burst out of the trees onto the trail. He almost collapsed when he saw me. His clothes were torn and covered in dirt. There were scratches all over his arms and neck like he had been running through thick brush for hours. He looked completely exhausted. "Please," he gasped. "You have to leave." "What happened?" I asked. That's when he grabbed my arm and whispered those words. "Don't look behind you." I felt the urge to turn around immediately, but the man tightened his grip. "If you look at her," he said, "she won't leave you alone." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" "She's been following me for hours." The man kept glancing past my shoulder. "Every time I stop, she stops." "Where is she now?" He swallowed hard. "Standing behind you." My heart started pounding. I slowly turned around. The trail behind me was empty, just trees and darkness. I looked back at the man. There's nobody there. His face went pale. She moved. Then he suddenly let go of my arm and started backing away. "You can't let her follow you," he said. Then he turned and ran back into the woods. Within seconds, he disappeared into the darkness. I packed my campsite as fast as I could. The entire time I had the overwhelming feeling that someone was standing just behind me, watching, but I never turned around again. When I reached my truck 2 hours later, I locked the doors and drove straight home. The next morning I found something inside my backpack. A photograph. It showed me sitting by my campfire that night, and standing directly behind my chair was a woman. But the worst part wasn't the woman. It was the person holding the camera, because their shadow was visible on the ground. And the shadow didn't look human. The police officer looked at me in a way I'll never forget. It wasn't fear. It was something worse. Recognition. Like he had seen this situation before and already knew how it usually ended. He closed the basement door slowly and said something that made my stomach drop. "Sir, whoever was down there probably didn't break in." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated before answering. "It looks like someone has been living in your house for a while." For a few seconds I couldn't process what he had said. Living in my house? That was impossible. I had lived there alone for nearly 20 years. The house wasn't large. Just 2 floors and a small basement. I knew every sound it made at night. At least I thought I did. Looking back now, there were signs. Small things. Things I ignored. Things that made sense only after that night. Started about 3 weeks earlier. I'm 60 years old now, and after retiring from my job as an accountant in Kansas City, my life had become pretty predictable. Most mornings I woke up around 6, made coffee, and read the news on my tablet. During the afternoon, I worked in my garage restoring old radios. At night, I watched television and went to bed around 10. Simple routine. Quiet life. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday evening. I walked into the kitchen and noticed one of the dining chairs pulled slightly away from the table. It wasn't much, maybe 6 inches. Still, it stood out because I have a habit of pushing everything back neatly when I'm done eating. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I had just forgotten. A few days later, I found the cabinet above the sink open. Again, not a big deal, except I clearly remembered closing it. The third thing was harder to explain. One of the lights in the hallway turned off by itself. I had switched it on earlier that evening. Still, houses have electrical quirks sometimes. I convinced myself it was nothing. Then food started disappearing. Half a loaf of bread gone overnight. A yogurt missing from the fridge. A bottle of water that I didn't remember drinking. Each time I told myself the same thing. You're getting older. You're forgetting things. But deep down something didn't feel right. Then came the night I heard the coughing. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I woke up suddenly. At first I thought I had dreamed the sound. Then I heard it again. A quiet cough. Dry. Human. Coming from somewhere downstairs. I sat up in bed and listened. Silence. Then another cough. This time it was clearer. It was coming from the kitchen. My heart started pounding immediately. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep beside my bed and walked slowly toward the stairs. The house felt different at night. Darker. Every step on the staircase creaked loudly beneath my feet. I reached the bottom and turned toward the kitchen. Everything looked normal, but something smelled wrong. Sweat. Body odor. Something stale. I stepped into the kitchen and turned on the light. Nothing. No one there. I almost laughed at myself, until I noticed the basement door. It was open. Just a few inches. I never leave that door open. Slowly I walked toward it. The smell grew stronger. Rotting food. Sweat. Damp air. I pushed the door open wider and looked down the stairs. The basement light was off. "Hello," I called. No answer. I reached for the switch and turned the light on. That's when I saw the mattress. It was pushed into the corner beside the furnace. Blankets. Empty food containers. Plastic water bottles. Clothes. Someone had been sleeping down there. My hands started shaking. I backed up the stairs and called the police immediately. They arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers searched the basement while I waited in the kitchen. Eventually one of them came back upstairs. "That mattress has been used recently," he said. "How recently?" Within a day or 2. I felt a cold wave of realization. Someone had been living beneath my house. While I was home. sleeping just 20 feet below me, eating my food, listening to my footsteps above. They searched the entire house but didn't find anyone. Then one of the officers opened the hallway closet. Inside, he noticed something strange. A small hole drilled through the drywall. He shined his flashlight through it. The beam landed directly on my bedroom, right where my bed was. Someone had been watching me sleep. The officer turned back toward me. "Sir," he said quietly, "who else has keys to this house?" "No one." He nodded slowly. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "We're going to set up a patrol car outside tonight." "Why?" He looked toward the basement door. "Because whoever was living here probably knows you called us." That night, I slept with every light in the house turned on. But around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard something. A slow creaking sound, coming from the basement stairs, like someone was climbing up them. I stayed frozen in bed, staring at the bedroom door. The footsteps stopped just outside the hallway. Then something moved past the hole in the wall, blocking the light. Someone was standing in the hallway, watching me. But when the police searched the house again that morning, they found nothing, except one new thing in the basement, another mattress, and this one was still warm. The detective told me something that I still can't stop thinking about. He leaned across the table, lowered his voice, and said, "You weren't the first person that car followed." At the time, I thought he meant someone else had reported a suspicious vehicle before. But that wasn't what he meant. He meant something much worse. 3 people had disappeared on that same road over the last 5 years. And every single one of them had been walking home alone at night. This happened last fall. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania that's quiet enough that most people don't even bother locking their doors. I'm 58 years old and work part-time repairing lawn equipment. My evenings are usually pretty uneventful. That night I had gone over to a friend's house to watch a football game. There were 4 of us sitting in his living room, drinking a couple beers and arguing about the game like we had done 100 times before. Nothing unusual. Around midnight I decided to head home. I only lived about 25 minutes away on foot, and the weather was calm. Cool air, no wind, perfectly quiet. Normally I drove everywhere, but I had 2 beers that night and didn't feel like risking it. My friend offered to let me stay over, but I told him the same thing I always do. I'll be fine. It's a quiet neighborhood. At first the walk felt normal. The streets were empty. Most of the houses had their lights off. Just a typical suburban night. I walked 3 blocks before noticing headlights behind me. Car slowly drove past. Nothing unusual about that, but something about the way it moved caught my attention. It wasn't going fast. In fact, it was barely moving at all, just slowly rolling forward until it passed me. As it went by, the driver lowered his window slightly. "Everything okay?" he asked. His voice sounded calm, friendly even. "Yeah," I said. "Just heading home. You need a ride?" "No thanks." The car stayed there for a moment longer than normal. Then the driver nodded and drove away. I continued walking. A few minutes later, I reached an intersection where the road curved around a small wooded park. That's when I saw the headlights again. The same car was coming back, but this time it was approaching from the opposite direction. I slowed my pace. The car slowed too. It stopped about 50 feet in front of me. The driver's window was still down, but the man inside didn't say anything this time. He just watched me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then suddenly the car turned into a nearby side street and disappeared. I told myself it was nothing. Coincidence. But now I was paying attention to every sound around me. I kept walking. Another 5 minutes passed. Then I saw the car again. This time it was parked in the middle of the road up ahead. Its headlights were still on, but the driver's seat was empty. I slowed to a stop. The engine was running. The doors were closed, but no one was inside. That's when something in my gut told me not to get closer. I looked toward the woods beside the road. At first I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement. A figure standing just inside the tree line. A man, completely still, watching me. My stomach dropped. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't trying to sneak. He was just standing there, waiting. I stepped backward slowly. Then I noticed something even worse. Another man standing behind a tree across the road. Then another figure further down the sidewalk behind me. 3 of them, all watching, not speaking, not moving, just waiting. The realization hit me instantly. The car wasn't meant to pick me up. It was meant to block the road, to force me toward the woods. I turned and started running. Behind me I heard branches snapping. Footsteps. They were chasing me. I pulled my phone out and started dialing 911. 911. What's your emergency? There are people chasing me, I said, breathless. I heard a car door slam behind me. The engine roared. The car sped past me and disappeared down the street. The footsteps stopped. Whoever had been following me vanished back into the woods. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the area but found nothing. No car, no men, nothing. The next day, a detective called me into the station. That's when he told me about the missing people. 3 cases. Same road, same time of night. Each person had been walking alone. None of them were ever found. I asked him something that still bothers me. Do you think they were the same men? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a folder and showed me a photograph. It was taken from a security camera on a nearby street. The image showed the road I had been walking down, the parked car, and 3 men standing beside it, waiting. But the detective pointed to something I hadn't noticed. A 4th figure, standing deeper in the woods behind them, watching everything. He closed the folder slowly. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. That 4th person shows up in every case. I stared at him. What do you mean every case? He leaned back in his chair. Every disappearance. I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Did anyone ever see his face? The detective shook his head. No. Why not? He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because he's always standing just outside the light.